But first, in this election's constant jousting between a PM we're told that voters don't like and an opposition leader that's simply not up to the job, the latest battleground is wages. Yesterday, Anthony Albanese dropped a clanger demanding a 5% increase to workers' pay.
Does that mean you would support a wage hike of at least 5.1% just to keep up with inflation?
Absolutely.
Even though, of course, he can't deliver it because it's the independent umpire that sets wages, not the federal government. The backlash from business and economists alike was swift and brutal, claiming a 5% wages hike would risk even higher inflation and kill jobs.
Oh, look, I think certainly it wouldn't be responsible. One of the things that we have seen, it's not just the cost of living that's going up at the moment, it's the cost of doing business as well.
Incredibly economically destructive. It would cost jobs. It would drive up prices.
The Reserve Bank would be very concerned about significant wage rises putting pressure on inflation.
Sent out to try and mop it all up was that economic brains trust, Christina Keneally.
Kieran, first of all, that is a misstatement of what was said today. What Anthony made clear is that people's wages should keep pace so that they can pay for the rising costs of living.
Now, when she failed, as we all knew she would, Albanese's minders tried to get him to walk it all back today. Not another blunder, journalists were told. He just really didn't hear the question.
Increases should be tied to inflation, because that's what you seem to be suggesting.
No, I'm not saying that. If the Fair Work Commission, which makes these decisions independently of government, makes that decision that people shouldn't get a real wage cut, would I welcome it? Absolutely.
But Mr Albanese, on that logic, you're suggesting that, OK, people right now are suffering, they're not seeing their wages increase. If there was an increase of 5.1%, you would welcome that. By that logic, if inflation goes up to 6%
no, that's
next
not.
year...
That's not by that logic.
Clear as mud, and he wants to run the country. A former Treasurer himself, the Prime Minister, didn't miss when asked for his assessment today.
What we saw from Anthony Albanese yesterday was reckless, was incredibly reckless. Anthony Albanese is a loose unit on the economy. What he said yesterday, it's like throwing fuel on the fire of rising interest rates and rising costs of living.
Now, the reality is that under the law in Australia, politicians don't determine what ordinary people are paid. About 3/4 of the Australian workforce are paid above award wages. So their wages are determined by agreement. In the case of big business employees, usually between management and unions. And in the case of small business employees, usually between the owner of the business and the individual worker. Of course, many agreed wage rates are influenced by the award. The award's the minimum rate that can be legally paid for a particular type of job. And that pay rate, the award rate, is set by the Fair Work Commission after hearing submissions from the ACTU, a whole lot of peak employer groups, and often also the government. It's the annual wage case. The Commission decides on a percentage wage rise that then flows through to awards based on the Commission's judgment about the capacity of businesses to pay more without unduly increasing inflation or creating unemployment. Presumably, when he said that workers deserve more and that government should support it, and in this case, Albanese's case, a 5.1% pay rise equal to the current rate of inflation, Albanese meant that a Labor government would perhaps make a submission to the Commission to this effect. Only now he says that wasn't what he was saying at all. You go figure. Right now, inflation is the real and present danger to Australia's economy. For the past decade, it's been running at around 1% or thereabouts, a barely noticeable level of across-the-board price increases. But now it's at 5%, tipped to go to 6% or even higher in the coming year. It's already, as we know, 8% and beyond in the United States and Britain on the back of massive taxpayer payments in the pandemic, supply chain disruptions and huge hikes in energy prices caused in part by the Ukraine conflict. Instead of arguing about a wage rise for low-paid workers, and let's face it, a 5% increase will be needed just to keep their wages up with cost of living, the real issue is, what can government do to control inflation, having already given it a huge kick along with the spending needed to sustain all of us when it shut down workers and jobs to stop the spread of COVID? That's the real issue. Getting the economy back on an even keel after all the disruptions, some of which the government necessarily brought upon itself. What we really need is a serious discussion about economic reform, about lower spending so the government doesn't have to borrow as much to add to inflationary pressure, and about less regulation at every level so that productivity can be higher, because higher productivity, in the end, is the key to a sustainably higher standard of living. But that's not what either side is giving us, with only 2 weeks to go before we decide, because that asks something of us as voters and something of vested interests, and neither side wants to challenge anyone lest they generate a scare campaign. As things stand, a 5% pay rise would hurt small business and would add to inflationary pressure, but anything less will leave many low-paid workers worse off. That's why the PM's happy to criticise his rival, but has been careful not to say exactly what the government's position is. And that's why the opposition leader, not the smartest tool in the economic shed for sure, has got himself into trouble yet again. But, and this is a warning about the politics of this issue, while the government's right, and while the government's being backed in by all the economic and business experts, the Labor leader, even though it's a bad move, and even though it's something he cannot deliver, he's promising workers more money. And if that buys their vote in a tight election, looking stupid or not, wrong or not, he'll argue, if he gets there, that it was worth it.